Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story Ghost in the Forest. The Horror Secret of the Old House is a book about a young woman who clears out her dead grandmother's home in rural North Carolina. She finds long-hidden secrets about a strange colony of beings in the forest. When Mouse's father asks her to clean out her dead grandmother's house, she agrees. After all, how bad can it be? The answer: pretty bad. She was a hoarder, and her house was filled with useless junk. That's terrifying enough, but there's more to it than that. Mouse stumbles upon her uncle's diary, which at first seems to be filled with meaningless grumbling until Mouse encounters some of the terrifying things he describes himself. Alone in the woods with her dog, Mouse finds herself facing a series of impossible horrors because sometimes the things that go bump in the night are real and they're looking for you. And if she doesn't face them head-on, she might not survive to tell the story. 6. Foxy had a face that was well live-in for 50 or in good shape for 70, and since she never told anyone her age, I couldn't say which it was. She was 6 feet tall and wore black leather boots with heels. She had on a denim skirt, a hot pink top, 3 necklaces, and a bright orange scarf. Her earrings would have reached her shoulders, but they kept getting tangled up in her scarf and then shed free them with a practiced flick. Her nails were a brilliant turquoise. On 99% of humanity, the outfit would have been a riot of mismatched color. On Foxy, it somehow all pulled together. She looked like a cross between a drag queen and a wildflower meadow. After we sorted out the issue of whether or not I was being murdered, Bongo had to be soothed with petting and dog treats, and I had to put on something more substantial than a towel. Foxy leaned against the kitchen counter and looked around. "Forgive the mess," I said hopelessly. "Ain't your mess, Hon," said Foxy. "We all know what the old lady was like. Tomas said you're here to clean the house out, and I wouldn't wish that job on anybody. Tell me about it." "Came over to thank you for the microwave." She moved restlessly, setting her jewelry clicking together. "And shit, you ain't eating ramen for dinner, are you?" I shuffled hurriedly in front of the ramen on the counter. "Come have dinner with us tonight," she said. It was somewhere between an offer and an imperial command. "It's just me and Tomas and Skip, but well, do you up a damn sight better than ramen." I was torn between a strong desire for a real meal and human company, particularly after that weird afternoon in the Stones, and an equally strong desire to stay home, read the rest of Cotgrave's diary, and maybe get to the bottom of things. "Well, your mama alive?" asked Foxy abruptly. "No. Then if she's looking down from heaven, she'll want to make sure somebody was feeding you, not eating ramen in this nasty old rat trap." I bowed to a wall superior to my own. "May I have an hour?" I asked humbly. "I'm still damp." Foxy grinned. "Look at me, rushing in here and dragging you out to eat dinner with soap still in your hair. Come on over when you're ready, Hon. Just across the road and up to the big house." And with that she swept out, leaving me slightly dazed in her wake. I could hear her immense boots clack on the steps as she went out. I couldn't imagine wearing heels that size on a gravel driveway, but she didn't seem to notice. "I guess I'm going out to dinner," I told Bongo. But first there was something important to do. I put a towel around my shoulders to catch drips and sat on the bed with Cotgrave's diary in hand. If I was hoping for a great revelation, by the way, I've taken up sculpting, I didn't get it. There were several pages about the adjustments to his medication and a few repetitions of the litany of the twisted ones. It gave me the creeps reading it now that I'd seen what it probably referred to. I made faces like the faces on the rocks. "You did not," I muttered. "Human faces don't work that way." I deliberately did not think about what had happened on the hill. It was just me being stupid. Then, about halfway through the book, slept in woods again. Had to. Saw one of their puppets. Just watched, didn't do anything. Don't know if they can hurt someone or just scare them. With my heart, not much difference. Head underlined difference. The rest of the page was blank except for another drawing of Kilroy sideways this time. Another few pages of nothing much. I squeezed water out of my hair. Then, met girl in woods, near place of stones. I sat up straighter. Hello, I muttered. Had Cotgrave been having an affair? No, he was old with a bad heart. Although that doesn't always stop people. She knows. One of them doesn't seem like it. Not normal, though. Beautiful hair. Ambrose believed in changelings. No reason to think he was wrong. Younger than the ones I saw in Wales, anyway, if one of them. Cotgrave had seen changelings in Wales. Well, I'd never been, but it seemed like the sort of place you'd get them. Perhaps Welsh fairies stole children and confiscated their vowels. Have almost finished typing up manuscript. Remember more than I thought I did, but no, I'm forgetting parts. Hid it. Won't say where. Think she might be reading this. If you are, then you're an awful old biddy and I wish I'd died before I married you. Go ahead and say something about that if you're willing to admit you've been snooping. I punched the air. Poor old Cotgrave, but he'd gotten in a blow there. Grandma would never admit to wrongdoing. If she yelled at him for calling her names, she'd be in the wrong for reading his private papers. It must have driven her up the wall not being able to call him on it. I sighed. And she'd probably taken it out on the old man too. But it's not like she would have been sweetness and light otherwise anyway. Won't say any more here. Doesn't matter anyway. Gonna get out one way or the other. And y'all finally be free of me, you old bat. Head underlined you old bat twice. And that was it. The last entry. The rest of the book was blank. I flipped through it carefully at first, then increasingly annoyed. Damn it, Cotgrave, you couldn't have said something a helpful clue for the person reading your journal. By the way, the girl I met lived down the road, and here's her phone number if you'd like to ask her about the stones. Gal. Well, presumably there was more in his typed manuscript, which quite possibly my grandmother had found and disposed of. No, she wouldn't have disposed of it. She hadn't disposed of the diary, and it insulted her to her face. She couldn't throw away anything. It was in the house somewhere, surely, with the green book and 1,000 old penny savers and the corks to every bottle of wine she'd ever opened. I sighed and shoved the journal into the desk drawer, then ran the towel over my drying hair. It was time to dress for dinner. Foxy was sitting out on the front porch. She had a mason jar in her hand, full of ice and amber, which she waved in my direction. It's a mint julep, she said. Want one? I don't see any mint, I said. Yeah, we ran out. Doesn't that make it just a julep? No, said a grey-haired man stepping out onto the porch behind her, because she doesn't put any simple syrup in it either. Foxy grinned. Oh, but mint juleps are so classy. Just straight bourbon over ice makes it sound like Immerlush. I'll take one, I said. After my experience with the carved stones, getting blitzed seemed like a delightful idea. The house was a sagging, ramshackle affair with a battered tin roof. There were a couple extra additions and a covered carport that held cobwebs and elderly machinery. I could see a single wide trailer set at right angles to it, and another farther back on the property. A radio played tinnily from inside the house. We sat on the front porch drinking juleps and watching fireflies blink on and off over the grass. The grey-haired man was named Skip. He had a thick braid down his back and pretty much screamed aging hippie. He was a potter. Not that it's hard to be a potter around here, he said. The clay's alive. Red clay, like blood. It wants to be useful. Practically throws itself. I nodded politely into my julep. Foxy rolled her eyes behind his back. Tomas came up with grease on his hands and launched into a diatribe about tractor engines that I didn't even begin to understand. Cool, said Foxy. Dinner's nearly ready, Hon. It needs a new glossometer with a zappulator cap, he said. Okay, not really, but hell if I can remember what he actually said. That glossometer's been fixing to go for ages, said Foxy. Well, it's gone now. We'll have to get a new one. Just thump it a few times. It'll be fine. Tomas sighed, gave me a "you see what I have to put up with" look, and went to scrub off his hands. We all tromped inside. It was dark in the house, with battered 70s wood paneling, but there were shockingly day-glow rock posters on most of the walls. Bob Marley smiled down benignly over the dinner table, holding a joint between his fingers. Skip pulled a casserole out of the oven, baked in a broad pottery dish. Foxy refilled my julep to the top. "Did you make the dishes?" I asked, as Skip slapped out generous spoonfuls into bowls. "He did indeed," said Foxy proudly. "He sells 'em for a small fortune at a gallery in town, but we get to eat off 'em every day." Skip ducked his head, looking embarrassed. The casserole was a fine example of what can be done with cans of cream of mushroom soup. It still beat ramen. We ate in silence, except for the radio and the sounds of silverware clinking against stoneware. Foxy put a scoop into a bowl and set it on the floor for Bongo, who slurped it up with great enthusiasm. I must take steps to ensure that my vet never reads this. Tomas had seconds and then gathered up the bowls. "You doing okay over there?" he asked. "Nothing bothering you?" "All kinds of things are bothering me," I said, compelled to honesty by the alcohol. I was up the bald hill behind the house. They looked at me. I waited for someone to say, "Oh, yeah, that was just Moonshine Hill." "A hill," said Skip. "No real hills around here." Tomas came to my defense, probably out of chivalry. "The sun rises back there. If you're walking, it sure seems like you're climbing." This was what I feared, but I plowed ahead anyway. No, it was a real hill. You know, the one covered with all the carved stones. The table went suddenly silent, except for the blare of the radio. It was playing Lydia the Tattooed Lady. If you are ever planning on having a serious conversation with people you barely know about weird carvings on an impossible hill behind your house, try to get a better soundtrack. Foxy looked at me solemnly across the table. "You seen those stones?" she said. "Oh," I said. "Yeah, I mean, there's a hill and a whole bunch of them on top." "That's not a good place, man," said Tomas. "My grandma, she'd say there were devils up there." "Ha," said Foxy. "Don't know about devils." I noted that we had somehow skipped completely over the question of whether the hill existed. This did not make me feel better. The radio informed us that we could learn a lot from Lydia. "They were just carvings," I said, even though they hadn't been just carvings. But if I admitted they were more than that, I'd be opening a door to a whole lot of things. I wanted that door to stay firmly closed. "Mostly," said Foxy. "Mostly they are. Sometimes they ain't. Like the hill. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it ain't." "Who made them?" I asked, shoving the question of disappearing hills behind that mental door with the rest. "Lydia, we were told, could show you the world on various parts of her anatomy." Foxy turned her head and said, "Shut that damned thing off, will you?" Skip leaned back in his chair and flipped off the radio. I was more relieved than I could say. "Don't know," said Foxy. "Not sure anybody made them." "Somebody had to make them," I said. "Maybe they grew," said Foxy. "Ever think of that?" She slammed back the rest of her julep. This was a very unpleasant thought. Couldn't it have been, I don't know, Indians or something? Foxy snorted. "There were people here for 1,000 years before white men landed," she said, "but I doubt any of them were ever fool enough to make things like that." She glanced at Skip. "Don't look at me," he said. "My people were all Kamawa, whole other side of the continent, like sensible folk. If you want a wise old Indian to dispense sacred wisdom, go find somebody from around here. Me, I throw pots." "I stay away from them," said Tomas, who had been listening silently the whole time. "You leave stuff like that alone, it leaves you alone. Mostly." I wondered what counted as leaving stuff alone. Not wandering around in fields singing to myself, not making faces at the rocks. No, that was just nerves. Nothing really happened. You're suggestible because the whole thing was freaky, that's all. I licked my lips. They stung a little from the bourbon. Did any of you know Cotgrave, my step-grandfather? Before my time, said Tomas. I did, said Skip, surprising me. Decent old man. Used to ramble around the woods a bit. Rambled a bit in his head too, I think. He sighed. Felt bad for him, being married to, well, I shouldn't say on account of her being your grandmother. Don't worry about it, I said, taking a hard swig and nearly choking. Foxy pounded me enthusiastically on the back. I know what she was like. It's fine. Cotgrave wasn't bad, said Skip. Mostly I think he just wasn't there most of the time. He tapped his forehead. Probably the best way to get through being married to my grandmother, I said. Did he ever say anything about a man named Ambrose or? I wanted to say the Twisted Ones, but I couldn't. Not that something was stopping me, but the phrase sounded suddenly stupid in my head, like a cheap slasher film. Ooh, the Twisted Ones, scary. All we needed was a bleached blonde co-ed to scream convincingly. Skip thought for a moment. Ambrose, sorry, no. He might have, but it was so long ago now. And I didn't know him well. He just would come by the studio sometimes on his walks. Helped me with a kiln opening a time or two. Ah, well, I said. Worth a try. Don't go spooking yourself, Foxy suggested. You're already in that house with all that crap. No sense making it worse. Thanks, I said dryly. I've been trying to forget. She grinned and topped up my bourbon. Here, this'll help. It is extremely difficult to find a book in a hoarder's house. No, let me qualify that. It is extremely difficult to find a specific book. I spent most of the next day yanking drawers open, searching for the green book or Cotgrave's manuscript. I wasn't picky, tearing through boxes, even looking under the couch cushions. I accomplished nothing except to trash the newly clean living room, and eventually gave up in defeat and admitted that this was not the way to find anything. Systematic, I told Bongo gloomily. I have to be systematic. She could have put it anywhere. Bongo opened one eye, decided that this did not sound like food, and closed it again. Anywhere. Upstairs or on the blocked-up porch or even in a garbage bag I'd thrown out before I knew what I was looking for. Crammed under a dead baby doll or in the box of something as seen on TV. And she was trying to hide it, which made it 10 times worse. Cotgrave's typed manuscript should be easier, shouldn't it? In theory he wasn't a hoarder. Assuming she didn't throw it out after he died. I straightened up the living room, feeling discouraged, took Bongo out, and went to bed. I dreamed that night about the White Stone. People in books always have such wonderfully clear dreams that show you their secret fears or reveal some key element of their tormented past or whatever. But in reality, if you try to explain a dream, you end up saying, I was talking to Abraham Lincoln, but he was also sort of my father, and we were in the house I grew up in, but the window screen kept falling out and I was trying to wedge it back in, over and over again, and I was getting really frustrated, and also I wasn't wearing pants. Well, in my dream, I was talking to Cotgrave, who was also sort of my father, and I was looking for someone, except that I kept digging through the boxes in the doll room trying to find them. We were in my first apartment, but the doll room was in it. I was getting very annoyed because Cotgrave wouldn't help me find whoever I was looking for. Then the dream changed and I went into another room, the living room of my first apartment, with the popcorn ceiling and the bonwood-coloured carpet, and the White Stone was standing in the middle of the room. I was enormously relieved because that's who I had been looking for all along. In the dream, I saw the carvings and understood what they were supposed to be. I went up to the stone and pressed myself against it, wrapping my legs around it, trying to touch the stone as much as I could, cheek and breast and belly and thigh, and the stone was cold, and no matter how closely I held it, I couldn't warm it at all. Then something woke me up and I rolled over and discovered I'd kicked most of the blankets over Bongo. He was snoring. I hauled the blankets back over myself and went back to sleep, and the dreams after that were all the usual foolishness about not being able to remember what period I had math class in. Maybe if I'd had a terrifying nightmare about the stone, things might have gone differently and I wouldn't have stayed. Maybe I would have thrown on my clothes, told my father to have the house demolished and driven away. But I don't know. I think by then, probably, I was already in too far. I woke one more time that night, when Bongo launched himself off the bed at the window, baying like a lunatic. What? He smacked his nose against the window, rebounded, and the bay turned into a yelp, then back to a bay again. Bongo, as I believe I have mentioned, is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. It was deer again. Skip had said they were everywhere out here, and here was proof. Long-legged shapes bounded across the driveway into the trees. Damn it, dog, you're a coonhound, not a deerhound. Bongo scrabbled at the window, indicating his willingness to branch out. I put my chin on top of his skull and looked out the window. His ears were pricked up as far as they could go, not very far, given the floppiness, and made 2 soft bumps on either side of my jaw. 2 more deer went by, and then the last of them. There was something wrong with this one's front legs. It was not exactly limping, but it held itself wrong. For a moment I thought I was looking at a person running stooped over with their arms dangling in front. I jerked back, startled. The deer crossed the moonlit gravel drive. No, it was only a deer. It had the long neck and the tapered head. There was just something wrong with its front legs, or perhaps its back, that made it shuffle along. It vanished into the trees. Bongo said "Hrrwawoof" and dropped down, sulking that I wouldn't let him eat the deer. I sighed. I felt bad for the deer, whatever was wrong with it. I suppose I could call a wildlife rehabber or something, tell them there was an injured deer in the woods for all the good that would do. It's not like I had it in my truck ready to deliver. Anyway, if a deer was an adult and walking, I'd read that it was more stressful to be captured and treated than just to wander around with a broken leg. Assuming it was a leg, it had actually looked more like a back problem. Were there hunchbacked deer? Well, there was that dolphin at the one zoo that had scoliosis and was bent sideways. Maybe it happens to deer, too. I mean, you'd think wolves would eat it, but there hasn't been a wolf around here in 100 years. 200. Anyway, I had enough on my plate without taking on the woes of damaged deer, dreaming about the carved stone soof. I'd taken a photo of one, hadn't I? The phone had made the camera noise before it shut off. I turned my phone on, noted that despite more than a day on the charger, it was at 15% battery and sinking fast, and checked the photos. The last one in the roll was washed out, a grey shape on a white background, badly distorted. The lines looked less like carvings and more like a badly filtered fingerprint. I sighed and turned the phone back off. It had dropped to 9% while I was squinting at it. Bongo climbed onto the bed, grumbling in the back of his throat. Go back to sleep, nitwit. I shoved my feet beneath him. If I dreamed at all after that, I don't remember it. 7. Dad, I asked. Yes. What did Cotgrave die of? For a minute I thought he wouldn't answer, and then he let out a long, whistling sigh. Oh, geez, Mouse. That was a long time ago. It was exposure. Exposure, whatever answer I'd been expecting, it wasn't that. Well, his mind was wandering quite a bit, and my mother wasn't the best person to take care of someone like that. We both made noises that might, under other circumstances, have been laughter. My stepmother always says that she can tell we're related because we have the same laugh. I suppose that means that we have the same no to laugh yet otherwise swicky sound too. It had been 5 days since I'd started the cleaning project. 2 since I'd been up on the hill with the stones. Dad had called, as he'd promised, to check up on me. I'd been tackling a hall closet. It wasn't a bad one, by which I mean that nothing fell on me when I opened it. Mostly it was old coats and cheap windbreakers. The plastic had gone stiff and cracked around the hoods. No green book. There was some talk about putting him in a facility, said Dad. Head seemed to be interested in the idea, probably to get away from her, honestly, but then he changed his mind very suddenly. And of course Mother was dead set against a caregiver in the house. He sighed again. And then one afternoon he just wandered off and she called the police the next morning. I'm afraid it took a couple days to find him. Turned out he was in the woods behind the house. Hypothermia. It wasn't that cold, but he wasn't in good health. That's awful, I said, imagining Cotgrave lying at the base of a tree somewhere. Had he scraped Kilroy was here into the bark in his last moments? Jesus, what a morbid thought. Get yourself together, Mouse. I think it happens more often than we think. Anyway, I've heard it's not a bad way to go, really. And at least he was out of it. He didn't have to clarify what out of it meant. I was standing inside it as we spoke. Some instinct prompted me to ask, was he or was his body? Oh hell, Mouse. I immediately felt guilty for asking. It was morbid curiosity, nothing more. Had to be. No, Dad continued. No, had been outside too long. Closed casket. Christ. I'm sorry I asked. I just keep finding his stuff, and I trailed off uselessly. No, it's fine. How is the cleanup going? Oh Lord. I looked around at the house. I suppose it was better, given that I'd gotten the kitchen mostly cleaned out and moved the stacks of newspapers. I was grimly aware of the untouched second floor above me. For a minute I felt like I was in a cave and I could feel tons and tons of weight pressing down, except that instead of stone, it was old magazines and Franklin Mint plates and boxes from the Home Shopping Network. I looked out the kitchen window, hoping for relief, and caught a flash of movement. There was a woman walking through the woods on the far side of the yard. She glanced at the house curiously, but kept walking. I wondered if she was the same woman I'd seen while walking Bongo the other day. Mouse. Sorry, someone out in the woods. Hiker. Just distracted me for a second. I'm making some progress. I've gotten a good chunk of the downstairs done. I haven't even started on the upstairs or the dead baby room. The what? I laughed again, a bit more genuinely this time. Sorry, did you know she collected dolls? I knew she had a few. He groaned. Oh Lord, she didn't have just a few of anything, did she? Afraid not. The room looks like a morgue for dead plastic babies. I'm starting on it tomorrow. I could almost see him shaking his head. If you want me to send in the bulldozers, just say the word. Nah, I said. Or not yet, anyway. I really am making progress. You don't have to do it just because I asked, Mouse. I paused. The correct answer was yes, I know. The true answer was yes, I do. I waited too long, and he said I couldn't ask, you know. I was shocked by my own resistance to the idea. A few days ago I'd been seriously contemplating throwing in the towel. Now, having seen the carved rocks, I wanted to get to the bottom of Cotgrave's mystery. Even if they weren't his creations, had clearly seen them and felt strongly about them, to have written that litany in his journal over and over. And I twisted myself around like the twisted ones. Had he found them by accident, just like I had? If I could find his typed manuscript, maybe that would help me learn what was going on with the rocks. If I could find the green book, that would definitely help. Unfortunately, the only way I was going to do that was to dig through 40-odd years of my grandmother's life. It's fine, Dad, I said. I kind of want to see this finished. But if I get to the second floor and it's just an unspeakable mess, I'll let you know. All right. Offers open. How are you doing? I asked, changing the subject. Oh, you know, he trailed off. I listened to him wheeze for a few minutes. They've given me an oxygen tank. There's still nothing wrong with me, to hear the doctor tell it, except for the bit where I'm not breathing. Maybe the oxygen will help, I said. I'm sure it will, he said, and we both knew he was lying, and we both knew that I knew. But families run on optimistic lies sometimes, so neither of us called the other one out on it, and we said goodbye. I went into town to drop off the contents of the closet and get coffee and internet. The goth barrister was on a tear about a woman who had brought in her baby and tried to change it on the coffee table. I told her no, and she just kept saying it was no big deal, she said, waving her hands in the air. It's a big deal to me. It's incredibly unhygienic. I mean, if you want to bring a kid in here to get coffee, that's fine, whatever, but don't put their poopy diapers on my table. I looked at the table that I had been about to set my laptop on and took a step back. It's fine, she said, collapsing over the counter. I hosed it down with bleach. I hosed everything down with bleach. Do you want coffee? Yes, please, I said meekly, hoping that it did not come with bleach. She filled a coffee mug and slid it across the counter. How's the house coming? Horrific, I said, feeling vaguely pleased that she had remembered who I was. Small towns. I'd forgotten what that was like. She had a baby doll collection. There's a whole room full of these awful dolls. You were, said the barrister, which was strangely gratifying to hear. She wrinkled her nose. Yeah. I opened my laptop. I had all these thoughts about donating them to needy kids or something, but I think the needy kids have probably suffered enough. I'm just going to take them to the dump. Probably for the best. I passed a pleasant afternoon in the coffee shop feeling normal. I was a perfectly normal freelancer in a nice little coffee shop in a nice little town, doing my job, trying to convince authors that semicolons were their friend. My problems were normal problems, like chasing invoices. Other than having to go outside and close the sunroof on the truck when it started to drizzle, everything was fine. Bongo was napping in the back seat and did not notice that he was getting rained on. Eventually, though, I had to go home. The coffee shop closed at 5, and there was still time to get a load of dead plastic babies ready to go to the dump. Note to self, do not call them that when you see Frank. I swung by the hardware store and bought even more gloves. I got dark grey work gloves this time, with serious-looking straps and buckles and rubber guards over the knuckles. These were gloves for handling a doll collection. The doll room itself was not as bad as it could have been, honestly. I turned up the radio and began hauling out clear plastic bins. I didn't have to actually open them to see what was in them, which made it go a lot faster. A quick look through jumbled, jointed limbs, no typed manuscript wedged in anybody's diaper, no green book covers. Bin is done and can be shoved into the living room. Once I had moved out all the bins, things slowed down. I had to grab loose dolls and shove them into trash bags. The gloves helped. As long as I had the gloves, I didn't have to touch them. The gloves made me invincible. I stayed invincible right up until one of the dolls batted its eyelashes at me. I let out a yell like I'd been shot and flung the doll across the room. Bongo leapt to his feet, baying in a panic. The doll landed head downward, facing me. The eyelids slowly clacked back open, aided by gravity. Oh. It's just one of those stupid dolls that open and close their eyes. Right. Okay. I picked it up gingerly and shook it back and forth. The eyelids moved in time. Yeah, okay. Bongo stood in the doorway, stiff-legged, making sounds he usually reserved for the UPS guy. It's all right, I said. It's okay, buddy. Just a little more on edge than I should be. I dropped the doll into the trash bag and cinched it closed. Let it bat its eyelashes at Frank at the dump. I went into the kitchen and turned the radio up as loud as it could go. The announcer introduced herself as Elaine Rogers and told me about how much they depended on my support to bring them all the great programming I enjoyed. Her co-host made a pun that would have needed a major overhaul to achieve the level of a dad joke. If I did not want to be listening to Pledge Week for the rest of my life, I was going to have to finish clearing this goddamn house. Bongo cocked his head and gave a last HRRRF, although whether it was a commentary on dolls or the radio, I couldn't say. I had taken the precaution of buying a bottle of wine. I poured a glass still wearing my work gloves and went back to work. A couple of days went by, and I'd tell you if anything interesting happened, but it really didn't. We got into a routine. I'd get up, hit the on switch on the coffee maker, take Bongo out to sniff around and pee on things, go inside, drink the coffee, eat instant oatmeal, and drag trash out to the truck. When the truck was full, I went into town, dropped it off with Frank, and went to the coffee shop. I then had more coffee, worked on edits, responded to emails, and pretended I was a normal human being who wasn't spending the evening sleeping in a dead man's bed with a flatulent coonhound. I would eat lunch. I would come home, take Bongo for a walk, load up another round of trash, take it to Frank, go back home, throw junk in bags, listen to public radio, and either eat ramen or increasingly go across the road and eat with Foxy, who was horrified by my ramen habit. "Your mama wouldn't let you eat that," she said. "It's deep-fried, you know." "We're having deep-fried pickles," I said. "Pickles is pickles. It's a vegetable. It's practically health food." I swirled my breaded, deep-fried pickle slice in ranch dressing and did not argue the point. I got to know the trio at the commune pretty well. Tomas was the responsible one. He did jobs, he said, helped out some farmers here and there. You know, hog-cutting season, snip snip, he made vague hand gestures. I didn't ask for details. Skip had a sly sense of humor and didn't talk much, but when he told stories, everybody listened. He didn't come to dinner one night, and when I asked, Foxy shook her head. "Bad brain day," she said. "Skip's got the bipolar thing. He's got meds for it and he takes 'em real good, but he still has bad days. I'll take him out a plate later." "He does real well," said Tomas, almost defensively. "He's a real good potter, hey?" "Relax, Tomas." She didn't say anything. "Friend of mine in college was bipolar," I said, and watched Tomas visibly relax. "It's cool. They didn't have the good meds back then. You know, she's doing a lot better now." "Amazing the stuff they've got these days," said Foxy, popping a fried pickle into her mouth. "But they still can't do shit about a hangover." She poured out more bourbon, possibly determined to be a viable test subject. After dinner at the commune, I went back home. Bongo would find something outdoors to pee on, and we'd be in bed by 9:30 or 10. I still hadn't found Cotgrave's typed manuscript. It had to be in the house somewhere. My grandmother would never have thrown it out, but it wasn't in the doll room or in her bedroom. I was starting to worry that it was upstairs. I couldn't handle the thought of upstairs. Every time I looked at the stairs, I just looked away again. The downstairs had been so bad, 9 days of work, and I was only about 2/3 done, and the idea that there was another floor left to go was more than I could take. I did clean out her bedroom more easily than I'd thought. I'd worried I would be sad, but I was still angry over the way she'd treated Cotgrave, and the anger carried me a long way. I kept the radio on loudly, and every time I would look at the pitiful pile of junk and start to feel melancholy, Elaine Rogers would remind me of why I valued public radio. Honestly, that pledge week had gone on so long that I no longer really believed in it. One of these days I was going to drive out to the radio station and it be an empty field with an old man saying, "Rogers, she's been dead nigh 40 years, ain't no coffee mugs here and there." I'd be haunted by the most benign ghosts known to man. Anyway, the closet in my grandmother's room was all old lady clothes. I hauled the whole pile out and dumped it in the Goodwill donation area and drove away before they could associate me with the bags. There was also an underwear drawer. I emptied that straight into a trash bag and tried not to think about anything. I mean, obviously my grandmother wore underwear, but I could have gone my whole life without having to see it. The mattress required wrestling. I enlisted Tomas one afternoon and we dragged it out, and the bed frame and dresser too. He wouldn't take money, so I picked up a bottle of good bourbon at the liquor store and brought it over to the next dinner. It was all fairly normal stuff. Aunt Kate emailed to say that the house was fine, nobody had broken into it or set it on fire or anything. My father called occasionally to see how I was getting on. Frank started greeting Bongo by name and reaching in the window to pet him behind the ears. I tell you this so that you won't think I'm a complete idiot, or maybe so that I can convince myself that I'm not a complete idiot. Maybe after the Stones and Cotgrave's journal, you think I should have been on edge. And yes, I probably should have been. Hell, I should have been yanking up topographical maps and conducting experiments to see where the hill with the bald was and where it wasn't. I should have bought a camera and taken photos of the stones with something that didn't catch fire when I turned it on. But I didn't. My days were all normal, and they were normal in a stressful kind of way, and I needed so much mental energy to keep from freaking out about the fact that I was cleaning out this awful hoarder house for a woman I hadn't even liked. I just didn't have anything left over to think too much about the stones. It seemed like something distant that had happened a long time ago. If I thought about it, I mostly thought it was just a weird thing. I had low blood sugar, and maybe some trick of the landscape made it look like a hill and valley. That's all. And the stones were strange, and I twisted myself around like the twisted ones, but they were just stones and somebody carved them into weird shapes. I didn't gnaw it over like you might think. I couldn't get any farther with it by thinking about it, so I sort of shoved the whole experience aside and stopped worrying about it. I had so many things on my plate that weird stones in a place I wasn't going to walk again just didn't seem that important. And then the next thing happened, and this time it was something I couldn't ignore. Bongo was restless. It had rained the day before and had been stuck inside because if we went outside his feet would get wet. He will happily stand in a puddle or chest deep in a fish pond, but wet grass on his paws is an abomination. Dogs, man. Dogs. I was spending a rare day at the house, not going into town. It was weird to find that I was missing it. Not just getting away from my grandmother's house, but seeing the people. I liked the goth barista. I liked the waitress at the diner who called me Ladybug. There are very few people who can use a pet name on me, but southern waitresses can get away with it every time. Frank at the dump saw so much of me these days that I was close to writing him into my will. Mind you, emptying 2 truckloads of dead doll parts together is a bonding experience. There was still at least 3 loads left. I had to take a break. You can only be shoulder deep in those things for so long before it starts to take an emotional toll. Anyway, he had stared into the bed of the truck yesterday and scratched up under his ball cap and said, "Oh my, that's a thing right there, ain't it?" I agreed that it was. There was something viscerally satisfying about chucking the dolls into the trash compactor. Is that wrong? Probably that's wrong. Still, these days I was taking entertainment where I could. I asked Frank if he knew of any weird stones in the woods. He scratched under his baseball cap. Stones, I mean, there's one shaped like a. He remembered suddenly that he was talking to a woman young enough to be his daughter, and his eyes slid away. A real funny one out behind the rolling goat farm. Kids go spray paint swears on it sometimes. Drives Madeline nuts. She's the goat farmer. This did not seem like the sort of stones I was pretending didn't exist. Back home, Bongo whined to let me know that he was extremely bored. I went outside to check the shed since the weather was nice. It contained a selection of old tools. No books and, thankfully, no dolls. I went back inside and Bongo inserted his nose under my elbow and flipped it up to indicate that he was dying of sorrow. I gave in and put a leash on him. "Okay," I said, "but we're not going anywhere near those creepy rocks, okay?" Bongo cocked an ear back at me, which means that I made a noise, not that he has any idea what I've said. We went out for a short walk. I went down the road instead of behind the house, and that seemed acceptable. Tomas was leaning over the hood of a car and waved at me. I waved back. This was nice. It was pleasant. You could imagine living in Ponsboro and learning people's names and actually knowing a little bit about their lives. I didn't have that in Pittsburgh. A semi came screaming around a bend in the road, interrupting my thoughts and reminding me suddenly of why walking by the side of the road on a country lane was best reserved for historical romance and Led Zeppelin songs. The blast of wind blew my hair back and flung grit into our faces. I crossed the road and went back into the woods. I could still see my grandmother's backyard through the trees. We'd gotten about 50 yards away, all told. "Fine," I said. Bongo took off happily through the soggy leaves, running back and forth on the end of his leash. Were we on private property? Oh, probably. There weren't any signs about it, though, or fences, so usually people don't care as long as you aren't shooting things or wrecking the place. We passed a no hunting sign, but deer season was over, and if we got shot, somebody would have to explain their poaching. Also, I was wearing a purple hoodie and most deer aren't purple. I had a vague sense that the hill with the stones was off to the left. I tried to keep right, but Bongo wasn't that interested in linear directions, and then we ran into a clearing that did have a fence around it, and a couple of shaggy cows gazing at us with vague benevolence. I said, "Hi, cows. I am like that." The cows did not say anything. We walked along the fence line. I tried to stay a little inside the trees, in case there was a farmer out with the cows. It wasn't so much that I thought I was doing something wrong, but I didn't want to have to talk to somebody and have that conversation. This here's private property, you want to go back to the road, and then even if they weren't mad, I'd be left feeling horribly awkward about it all. We went along the fence until we ran out of fence and cows and pasture, then kept going. Now it was all just scruffy pine and dead leaves. Junk pine, as my aunt would say, the stuff you get a decade or so after logging. Not very botanically interesting, not much of an understory, just the occasional Christmas fern and scruffy little clumps of sedge. Sedges have edges, I told Bongo. He flicked an ear back at me, unimpressed with my botanical identification skills. I listened to woodpeckers knocking on the trees. One made a high-pitched supervillain cackle. A crow called somewhere and another one replied. Bongo bounced around, his nose working, occasionally demanding that we halt so that he could get a thorough sniff of a particularly good dead leaf. One good leaf led to another and he wrapped his leash behind my legs, so I had to do a little pirouette to unwind myself, and that's when I saw it. There was something hanging in the trees. It hung by heavy ropes. My first wild thought was that it was a person, some kind of trapeze artist, and then that someone had been crucified. Or lynched. Bongo let out a thin, frightened whine. My eyes travelled slowly upward. It was naked and split in half, and it had hooves. It was a deer. I felt a stab of relief. It's only a deer, it's not a person, nobody's been crucified or lynched or murdered, it's just a deer. Some hunter probably hung it up to clean it, but the feeling vanished almost as soon as it had begun. The deer wasn't hung up like a hunter was cleaning it. It was split open from the rib cage downward, and the hind legs gaped obscenely wide. The guts were missing. The front legs stuck out straight to the sides, with a rope at each ankle. The hooves dangled like limp hands, and black rads fluttered from each wrist. It did not exactly have a head. The deer's own head was missing. There was a skull where the head should be, some kind of large animal skull, but it was turned upside down. The skull was clean white bone. Because of the angle, it looked as if the deer had no neck but a dreadfully misshapen head with teeth jutting from the top. The empty eyes stared at me. Someone had run ties through the severed neck and lashed them into the sockets. The ropes creaked as the monstrous thing swayed. Stones were hung from the rib cage, tied with twine. They knocked together like a grisly wind chime. 2 of the stones had holes in the middle. Stones with holes are called hagstones, I thought. That is true, incidentally. It is also possibly the most useless thing I've ever thought in a crisis. I stared at the thing for probably half a minute. It wasn't that I couldn't look away. I wanted very much to look away. But I stared because if I could find something, a seam, a tag that said it was a Halloween decoration, a video camera, even a goddamn artist statement nailed to the tree, then it wasn't real. I wanted so very much for it not to be real. Bongo whined again, louder. My thoughts were moving very slowly. I think it's real. It's really there. Someone made this. The slow flow of thoughts sped up. Who could have made this? Who would have made this? Images stuttered through my head, none of them terribly coherent. Sociopaths, serial killers, satanic death cults, some stupid college kids, performance artists, monsters, and I twisted myself about like the twisted ones. If someone had made this, then they had been here. Where I was standing. They might still be here. They might be coming toward me right now while I stared at their grisly effigy. My fingers closed convulsively on Bongo's collar, and I turned and ran. 8. A coonhound in good condition is a superb natural athlete. Even a lazy, elderly one who can't hunt is pretty impressive. Bongo half-dragged me through the woods, for which I was grateful, because otherwise I don't know if I could have run nearly so far or so fast. I didn't dare look over my shoulder. If I wasn't looking at the ground, I'd break my ankle on a tree root. More importantly, if I looked over my shoulder, I might see what was coming after me. Since I didn't look, my fear filled the woods with black shapes hunched over and shuffling after me. If I was being chased, I couldn't hear any footsteps behind me. That wasn't a surprise, though, because I was gasping and my blood was pounding and my side stabbed with pain as if there were shards of glass in it. But I didn't dare stop running because they could be close, they could be right behind me. In another second a hand could close over my shoulder and jerk me backward, and what if it wasn't a hand, what if it was a hoof, and the woods were full of dead deer with their heads on upside down and their rib cages full of clacking stones. I believe we had gone a little more than a mile at an ambling pace to reach the effigy. I also believe that Bongo and I covered that distance back in less than 6 minutes. I could not have duplicated that feat for all the money in the world. It was Bongo who got us home. I wasn't looking where I was going beyond the next step and the next. Leaves crunched under our feet, and suddenly they stopped crunching because we were bursting into the backyard. I heard the tock-tock rapping of the woodpeckers fall silent, probably because they'd just seen a woman and a dog go running by at full speed. I didn't even think about going into the house. If we went into the house, we were trapped. I could lock the door and drag things in front of it, but they could come in the windows, whatever they were, the twisted ones, so we ran around the side of the house instead. I tore the doors of the truck open. Bongo went into the passenger seat without losing momentum. I slammed the door behind him and bolted around the front. I couldn't help but look behind me then. There was nothing there, but that didn't slow me at all. They could be hiding. They could be in the trees or behind the house. They could be invisible. The fear I was feeling was no longer a rational fear of other humans, but had cracked open some deep vein of childhood terror. Monsters under the bed, shadows gathering under the basement stairs. The truck started before I was thinking enough to be afraid that it wouldn't start. I blessed the engineers at Nissan and peeled out of the driveway at top speed. If there had been a cop on the road, he would have stopped me, since I was going at least 80, but there wasn't. Too bad. I really could have used one. I looked in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something. Black shapes on the road. A deer with its head on upside down chasing the car. Don't even think that. I slowed down as I came into Ponsboro because there were other cars, and if I rear-ended one, my truck might stop working, and if my truck stopped working, I couldn't get away. For lack of anything better to do, I pulled into the parking lot of the Piggly Wiggly. I wanted to be around other people. Monsters didn't get you in broad daylight. I had to tell someone. The police, the fire department. The whole idea of having to explain it was so overwhelming that I parked the truck, threw my arms around Bongo, and burst into tears. Hounds are very huggable dogs. He bore this patiently, tail wagging, and licked my face occasionally. He was very calm. Dogs are lucky to have short memories. Then again, from Bongo's point of view, had gone for a walk, been scared, ran away, then had a ride in the car with his person, and now his person was sad, but that was okay because he was there to lick her. Someone tapped on the window. I screamed. Whoa, I heard, muffled by glass. It didn't sound like a monster. The goth barista from the coffee shop was looking at me. She was carrying a gallon of milk and had a worried expression on her face. I rolled the window down. Are you okay? She asked. You're fine, I said automatically. When people ask if you're okay, you say fine. It's a hindbrain function. She looked at me skeptically. Not fine, I corrected. I was suddenly aware that my face was covered in tears and dog slobber and possibly snot. I stank of sweat. There was hair sticking to my cheeks. Yeah. Not fine. Right, she said. Why don't you come to the shop? You can use the bathroom and I'll make you some tea. Tea? Oh God, I could have tea. I could get a cup and drizzle honey into it and watch it sink through the liquid to the bottom. I could put my hands around the mug. Everything would be awful still, but there would be this little space that I understood. Tea would be good, I said. And then, wait. I can't leave Bongo. Bring him in, she said. As long as he doesn't bite or pee on things, he's fine. He won't. Somehow or other I got out of the truck. It's probably good that she'd come along when she had, because otherwise I might never have left the truck again. Bongo put on his best manners to be introduced. He sat down very politely and gave the goth barrister his very best tragic hound look. She scratched him under the chin. Hi, Bongo. Enid. You're a good boy, aren't you? He put his ears down and wagged his tail to indicate that he was indeed a very good boy, and also no one had ever petted him, and he would like it very much if she was the first. She complied. Enid. That was good to know. We walked to the coffee shop. We were about 2 blocks away, down streets lined with houses that had been turned into offices. Enid kept up a stream of completely inconsequential chatter along the way. I looked behind me for monsters. Bongo stayed close by my heels as we went into the coffee shop, then flopped down under the table. His nose worked, probably separating out coffee bean varieties, but the mile run, dragging my ass through the woods, had clearly exhausted him. He let out one of his deflating sighs. I put my feet under him. Enid brought him a dish of water and then brought me a mug of tea. I put my hands around it and stared into it. And I twisted myself around like the twisted ones. You want to talk about it? Should I call someone for you? Yes. No. No, there's no one to call. Really, what was I going to say to my father? Hey, Dad, there's a monstrous effigy in the woods. Did you know about that? Wait, no. The police maybe, I'm not sure. She sat down at the table across from me and put her chin in her hands. Right. I took a drink of tea. It was too hot and burned the roof of my mouth, but it was tea and tea was good, and I was in a world where there was tea, not in a world where there were monsters in the woods. Those were 2 separate worlds. As long as I stayed in this one, I was safe. I saw a thing in the woods. Someone made a thing. Idea. I tried to focus on what I was saying. My teeth wanted to chatter, even though it wasn't cold. It was like when a hunter hangs up a deer, you know, except it wasn't a hunter. Enid's eyebrows were starting to climb under her hot pink bangs. Are you sure it wasn't a hunter? Yes. Very sure. It was crucified. They'd taken off the head and put a skull on it, upside down. It was sewn to the neck all through the eye sockets. And the rib cage was full of like wind chimes made of rocks. I swear I'm not on drugs. Enid blinked. That's too bad. Sounds like you could use some about now. Was this by your house? I started to nod, then shook my head. Behind it. But not right behind it. Like a mile. We went for a walk. I reached down and rubbed Bongo's ears. He leaned against my shins. After a minute, I said, I kept looking for a tag. Or a camera or something. Like maybe it was art. Enid drummed her fingers on the tabletop. You know, that's not a bad guess. We've got tons of artists around here. Somebody could have hung this thing up and be taking photos of it as it rots or something. I shuddered. Why on earth? Oh, you know. She rolled her eyes. It's a statement about mortality, or local food, or how their last girlfriend didn't love them enough. I laughed. It wasn't much, but it was a genuine laugh. For a few minutes that afternoon, it had seemed like I'd never laugh again. I don't know, I said. I remembered the blind panic I'd felt running from it, but yeah, I'd been on edge lately. Had I freaked out over nothing much? No. Crucified deer in the woods are freaky. even if it's art. Enid glanced at her watch. Tell you what, one of our local cops comes in for a red-eye around 3:30 every day. If you hang out until then, you can ask him what to do without having to, call the police station and make a big deal out of it. Will they believe me? I asked. Listening to myself talk, I was having a hard time believing me, and I'd been there. I believe you, she said. I don't know what it was you saw, but you don't seem like the type who melts down for no reason. She refilled the hot water in my tea. Wait an hour until Officer Bob comes in, and then we'll see what he has to say. I waited. After a few minutes, I even felt good enough to go and get my laptop out of the truck and do a little work. One of the emails that I was waiting for had come in, and I got to go through a file and see all the changes that the author had made. He was supposed to be fixing problems I'd pointed out, which he mostly had, but in a way that introduced several new problems. Normally it might have been frustrating, but it was such a familiar problem that it was soothing. Bongo lay under the table, being very polite about the people who came in for coffee, and I slipped him bits of a day-old muffin. Officer Bob was a tall man with big shoulders. He wasn't fat, but middle age had definitely smoothed him down a bit, and his crew cut couldn't quite hide the bald spot in back. Enid pointed to me and said, "She needs to talk to you," and I found myself telling him the whole story. He turned toward me with an expression that said, very briefly, "Oh Lord, now what?" but he hid it well. At Crucified Deer his eyebrows went up, and he actually brought his coffee over and sat down at the table. He asked a couple of questions along the way. How far did you go? Was it on your property? Do you remember where it was? Any landmarks? And then, did you take a photo? I stared at him, and then touched my jeans. My phone was still in my pocket. Turned off because of the software bug, but if I'd turned it on, surely I would have had enough juice to at least take a photo of the effigy. It might have just made a camera noise and turned off again, but at least I'd have something. I didn't even think oh God, I'm dumb. He grinned. No. You had a shock, sounds like. Don't feel dumb. Everybody does that. It's just that if you took a photo, it would have GPS data on it, and we could figure out exactly where it was. I groaned. I take photos of particularly good salads. I can't believe I didn't take a shot of the thing. He leaned back in his chair. Well, people who put up a thing like that probably plan to leave it there for a while. We can go back and try to find it. I blanched. Tell you what. I can take what's called an informational report. So we can document what you saw, and it'll be on file. He didn't say so we can talk about this at the station afterward, but I suspect that was implied. And afterward, we can go back out there and see if you can find it again. He leaned down and scratched Bongo. Or if this fellow can. Dead deer should bring him running. It hadn't occurred to me that Bongo might have led me to the effigy in the first place, but of course that made sense. If it had been well dripping. You were. He glanced unobtrusively at his watch. How about you write the whole thing down and email it to me? I'd rather hear it in your own words than try to write my version and get it wrong. Then we can get it on file, and we'll have someone meet you at the house later and you can show them where you saw it. I can do that. Email you, I mean. Sure, he said. He grinned briefly. We have email and everything. We even read them. Enid snorted. I got his email address and he got my physical address. Someone will be around later. Hopefully me. And maybe Bongo here can lead us back to it. Officer Bob paused. I don't know if his sympathetic look was something cops learn to do or if he was genuinely feeling it. It was a good look either way. Really, it's probably just kids trying to be edgy. But we'll check it out anyway. He waved with 2 fingers around his coffee cup and went out the door. I suspected he was probably going to go tell the people at the station about the crazy lady who was seeing Crucified Deer, but that didn't matter. If he came out, I could show him the deer. If someone else saw it, then it was real, not a monster thing, and they could find out who done it and it would be their problem and not mine. I wrote the email. I don't have too many useful skills, but I can by God write an email. And this was good. I sounded very calm in email and not like a woman who had driven at breakneck speed down the road and burst into tears in the parking lot of the Piggy Wiggy. That woman would sound awful on a police report. Subject gave the following statement: holy shit, there's a nasty thing hanging up in the woods. Subject appeared agitated. Subject's dog requested ear scritches, which were duly provided. I floundered for a bit trying to think of how to describe what I had seen. Eventually I wrote effigy and hoped that the police had access to a dictionary. No, that was unkind. Officer Bob had seemed pretty sharp. How do you end an email to the police? You don't write love, Melissa. Even sincerely seemed weird. By my hand on this 23rd day of March, no, probably not. Eventually I just typed my name and the date underneath. Enid brought me more hot water. I swirled the tea bag around in it, extracting the last molecules of tea. Am I nuts? I asked her. Undoubtedly, she said cheerfully. But that doesn't mean somebody didn't hang something weird in the woods. This place is full of freaks, and I say that as one of them. I let out a long sigh. I felt better. I had told the police. I was being responsible. Whatever happened now, it wasn't my fault. Thank you, I said to Enid. I was starting to feel embarrassed. I'd bought coffee from this woman like 8 times now, and she'd pulled me out of a truck sobbing. I swear, I don't usually have breakdowns like that in the parking lot. She snorted. If I ran into a crucified deer, crying in the parking lot would be the least of it. I'd run screaming through the town stabbing people. I paused. How would that help? Oh, it wouldn't, but I'd have a great excuse. Fair enough, I said, and took my leave. Going back to the house was not the easiest thing I've done in my life. Deep breaths, I told myself. Deep breaths, it's just a weird sculpture. It didn't chase you. It wasn't alive. It was just something that somebody hung up. Officer Bob will show up and yell, go find it, and he'll tell you that it was just some weird hunter's idea of art. It took me a few minutes to get out of the truck. Even so, it's fine. You're fine. You don't need to go out in the woods alone looking for it. It's not like somebody dropped it on your porch. It has nothing to do with you, and I twisted myself around like the twisted ones. Stop it. I got out of the truck. I'll be honest, if Bongo had been upset, I would probably have gone back into town and asked Enid if I could drink coffee until Officer Bob was available, but Bongo acted like nothing much was going on. So I went back inside and turned on the radio and heard all about the great programming that my pledge helped pay for. I had yet to hear any of this great programming, but hey, it had been less than 2 weeks. Waiting for the police to show up is rather like waiting for a package to be delivered, except that you have a vague nagging worry that the package is going to tell you you're breaking the law and arrest you on the spot. I tried to fill another garbage bag with old newspapers while jumping up and going to the window every time a car went past on the road. I thought about going across the street to Foxy, but it occurred to me that between Skip's mental issue and Thomas not being white and Foxy being Foxy, they might not be on the best terms with the cops. I stayed put. About 5 o'clock, when I'd nearly given up on anyone coming out at all, a black and white Charger pulled into the driveway and Officer Bob got out. He waved as I came out to meet him. Bongo remembered a friend and demanded petting, which was duly provided. Living out here? Asked the cop, gazing at the porch. Well, for a couple days. Or weeks, I guess, until I get the house cleared out. I stifled a sigh at the thought of more weeks spent in the house, living on a steady diet of ramen and public radio. The old lady called us out a few times, he said, still rubbing Bongo's ears. Wanted her neighbors arrested. What neighbors? Place across the street. He jerked a thumb over his shoulder. To hear her tell it, they were throwing all-night parties with drugs and rock and roll. I groaned. Something else to apologize to Foxy and crew for. They've been so nice to me. Officer Bob chuckled. Yeah, They're nice folks. But you know how it is. Some people just like to complain. Lord, ain't that the truth? This pretty well hash out the conversation. I tugged Bongo's leash. Ready to go. Lead the way. 9. We couldn't find it. I swear that I combed every inch of ground for half a mile around, and it wasn't there. I found the cows. I found the fence. I walked to the end of it, I walked past it, and there was nothing in the trees. I know it was here, I said to Officer Bob. I felt a strong urge to cry, which was stupid. I should have been glad it wasn't there. I should have been thrilled that there wasn't a horrible monstrous art project made of deer bits dangling from a tree. Instead, I would have given all the money in my bank account to find the damn thing again. Bongo was no help. Bongo just about knows it on a good day. He wandered around, snuffling at the leaves with enthusiasm. I knew Officer Bob probably thought I was a liar or seeing things or making stuff up for attention. He was being very nice and very professional about it all, but I was sure that I was being mentally shuffled from reported a problem to is a problem. I swear it was here, I said, probably for the 100th time, as we slogged back toward the house. Bob nodded. It's all right, he said. It might still be. All these trees look alike if you're not used to them, and it's easy to get turned around. He waved vaguely into the woods. If you do run into it again, take a photo. That'll help us find it again. But who could have put it there? He shrugged. Without seeing it, I can't really say. I don't know. Kids, maybe. Any kid who would make the thing I saw was on their way to being an avant-garde artist or a serial killer. He was very polite and he didn't make me feel like I was wasting his time, and after he left, I went into the house and cried into Bongo's fur for 20 minutes anyway. The rest of the evening was uneventful. Foxy came over to ask if I wanted dinner, but I told her I wasn't feeling great. She left and came back 20 minutes later with a Tupperware container of enchiladas. Tomas swears by 'em, she said. If your innards are giving you trouble, this'll blow the sick right out of you. High praise, I said, taking the enchiladas. Thanks, Foxy. She fidgeted for a moment. You need anything? Hon saw there was a cop here earlier. You in some kind of trouble? Oh. Yeah. Him. I sighed. No. I called him. I thought I saw something in the woods. Something. There was a dead deer in a tree, I said. Her hot pink lipstick skewed sideways as she frowned. That's weird. We don't got any cougars around here. I mean, people say they see 'em, but it's always just some big house cat or a coyote they didn't get a good look at. No, this wasn't a cougar. I tried to explain what I'd seen, while downplaying how scared I'd been. No, of course I didn't run away screaming and crying. Why do you ask? Officer Bob said it was probably just kids. Yeah, sure, said Foxy. Kids always stick dead deer in trees with their heads on upside down. It's the next thing they play with after Legos. She rolled her eyes. Thank you, I felt more vindicated than I'd like to admit. That's what I was thinking. She shook her head. Nasty things out and about, she said, half under her breath. Then, louder, you be careful, Hon. Lock your door at night. I always lock my door. I glanced around. Although with this place, I'd be grateful if someone broke in and stole some stuff. She laughed at that. Fair enough. I'll let you alone, then. You have any problems or just get spooked, come on over. We got a spare room. She left, and I stood over the sink eating the enchiladas, while the radio told me how grateful they were for listeners like me. Bongo woke me up in the middle of the night again, baying. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I sat up and looked out the window, on the off chance that it was whoever was hanging freakish effigies in the woods. Kids. Right. But no, it was deer again. Damn it, Bongo. Hruwoof. 2 of them bounded across the yard. A third followed slowly, hugging the woods. Probably the one I'd seen before. Poor sod was lucky it hadn't been hung up in a tree. We killed the wolves, and then the apex predator was cultists or artists or dangerous lunatics. My apex predator bounced on the bed, stomping on my calves. Go to bed. He tried to pretend that he wanted to go outside, but I was fairly sure that it was in order to find a deer to bark at, so I glared at him until he flopped back down on the bed. You're a wretch, RRFFF. Hi, Bongo, said Enid when I dragged into the coffee shop the next morning, probably looking like death warmed over. And then, as something of an afterthought, hi, Mouse. Coffee. I was not offended, as of course you greet the dog first and the human later. Yes, please. She brought the coffee over and sat down at the table across from me. Bongo put his head in her lap and looked tragic. So I had a thought, she said, rubbing his ears. I gazed into the coffee. Ah, you couldn't find the thing again, right? I looked up from my coffee. How do you know? Officer Bob came by this morning for coffee, she said. So I asked, yes, your precious puppy dog, and he said yeah, I'd gone looking but couldn't find anything. I sighed. It was still embarrassing. I know it was there, I mumbled. Hey, no question. Either it got taken down or you got turned around. Woods are like that. Anyhow, if you go on the county's website, you can look up who owns the property behind you. That way you get an idea whose land it was on, and then you can ask them about it. The idea of tromping up to a stranger's door and saying, hey, did you know there's a horrible vanishing deer sculpture on your property was distinctly unappealing. Still, it was a good idea. I pulled up the county website and went to work. It was a pretty fancy website. It had topography maps and property line maps. It also had a crappy user interface if you actually wanted to find out any real information, but that's government for you. You could click the property maps and get a reference number, and then if you dug around the website long enough, you found a place to enter your reference number and it would tell you what name the property was registered under. There were 3 people who could conceivably have owned the property behind my grandmother's house, and 2 of them were holding companies that were, Enid told me, just waiting until Ponsborough became big enough so that they could develop exclusive housing communities and charge $1 million an acre. No luck there. I looked up the 3rd property, and it belonged to a neighbour whose property abutted hers. Dad's property now, I guess. Eventually mine. What a dreadful thought. I stared at the topographical maps for a while. There were no hills behind the house. The hill with the white stone was not there. Well, of course there weren't. I'd known it at the time. I just had tried not to think about it because thinking about it was too hard. I went a long way, that's all. I went a long way around. The map is old. The satellite photos were taken in a different season. Even I didn't buy that one. Hills aren't like trees. They don't subside in winter and come back in spring. The National Geological Survey, or whoever does these things, had been tromping around with their little survey tools before I was born, and there hadn't been a hill there, and there still wasn't a hill there, except that I'd been on the hill. Sometimes it's there, and sometimes it ain't, Foxy had said, and I twisted myself around like the twisted ones. My grandma she'd say there were devils up there. Thomas' grandma was, it was almost certain, a better person than my grandma. Mine had been wicked enough that even devils would stay clear of her. That thought rang around in my head a lot longer than it should have. Copgrave had said something about that, though, hadn't he, about how they avoided her like the smell of a dead skunk. He hadn't been talking about devils, though, had he? Plate eyes and poppets and them, whatever they were. Stop. This is stupid. You're working yourself into a fit because a poor old man wrote down his dementia in a journal. The dead deer effigy hanging in the tree hadn't been dementia. Bongo, generally as perceptive as a cinder block, flopped his muzzle over my foot and began licking my ankle. Probably he was just hoping that there was food on it, but it did make me feel better. Don't start crazy making. You're alone in a house in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of dolls. If there was ever a time to not start down the horror movie road, this is it. Besides, my grandmother's presence was still all over the house. If it had kept the twisted ones away in life, I couldn't imagine it had dissipated just yet. Enid refilled my coffee. No luck. I shook my head. I don't know. It was a good thought. Does I check the name A? Chandler seemed like the sort of person who would hang dead deer from the trees. Enid snorted. She keeps cows. I digested this. Were dangerous people who make deer effigies allowed to keep cows? I mean, I don't know her well, but I'm pretty sure she's not the type. She has sheep too. And I think some kind of endangered chicken. Endangered chicken, I repeated. Well, of course there would be endangered chickens. Everything's endangered these days. Why not a chicken? There's a lot of that around here. Rare-breed livestock stuff, you know. I nodded glumly. Another dead end, then. I closed the topography website. Maybe I'm nuts, I said. Sure, that's possible. Enid seemed untroubled by this. I tried to focus on work for the next few hours, for all the good it did. It was too easy to lose my place and read whole passages without absorbing any of it. I think it took me an hour to edit a single page, and it wasn't the sort of page that would normally require an hour of work, just some rogue commas and a spot where the word flow was choppy instead of smooth. Eventually I closed my laptop and took Bongo home. I woke up very slowly. There was a sound that I had been hearing for some time, and gradually I came awake, still hearing it. It was Bongo. He lay flat at the foot of the bed, his fur standing up in spikes, and he was growling. His growl was harsh and awful, like nothing I'd ever heard before. I could see the square of moonlight coming through the window reflected in his eyes. It came to me, rather distantly, that Bongo was terrified. My first instinct was to sit up, put my arms around him, ask him what was wrong. Being only half awake may have saved me. I did not move my head. I looked over to the window, where Bongo was staring. There was a white face in the window. I didn't scream. That's the thing that's still the most astonishing to me about the whole terrible encounter. I didn't scream. It was horribly misshapen. The eyes were huge and dark. It had an impossibly thin, vapid smile, and the forehead jutted upward. It took a moment, as I lay there not screaming, to realize that it was an animal skull, upside down, and what looked like a smile was the suture between plates of bone. The jutting forehead was the skull's snout, flipped over. Teeth gleamed at the top and the eye sockets were laced with black. It was the effigy. I don't remember what I thought in that moment. Something that allowed me not to scream or go mad. I suppose it's not real. I'm dreaming, or if it's really there, it's someone trying to scare me. They've dragged that awful thing on the porch as a prank. It turned its head. It moved like a living thing, like a great bird, turning the skull head on the hanging folds of neck. It turned and looked at me. I knew it couldn't possibly see me. I was lying in the deep shadow of the wall, and my eyes were slits. Even if it could see me, it couldn't know that I was awake. It was very important, somehow, that it not know I was awake. Because it's a monster and monsters can't get you when you're asleep, and if I pull the blankets over my head it can't get me, but I don't dare move because I can't get the blankets over my head fast enough, and it could still get Bongo if I move. It can come through the window, but as long as I stay still it has to stay out there. It turned its head again, sideways, so that one dark eye socket stared in the window. Bongo's growl was so loud that I could feel it in my teeth. Tap, tap, tock, tap-a-tap, tock. The hollow woodpecker noise, right outside the window, caused by the stones hanging from the effigy's ribcage knocking together. The sound I'd been hearing for days now. I stopped thinking in words. My mind was a pure white terror. The skull tilted sideways, still bird-like, as if it saw something that interested it. Bongo's fur stood up in spikes. And then it left. I heard it drop to the planks of the porch, heard unsteady footsteps going away down the steps. 2 feet or 4, I couldn't tell. Heard the tock-to-patok of the hold stones. One knocked against wood, probably the railing post, and the sound was loud as I had ever heard, and that means it's been here before. It's been here all along. Oh God, the twisted ones. I hear the twisted ones were always here. The front door was locked. The back door was probably locked, but even if it wasn't, an intruder would have to move a few £100 of newspapers to get to it. The windows were all shut and had screens. If it tried to take the screens off, surely I would hear it. What felt like a long time later, Bongo stopped growling. I finally moved. I rolled off the bed, pulling the blankets with me, and dragged them into the closet. I crawled to the bedroom door on hands and knees and locked it. I didn't take my eyes off the window. I had no way to barricade that, but at least I could hide. I pulled Bongo into the closet with me and slid the closet door shut. It was one of those stupid sliding doors that are basically fiberboard panel and laminate fake wood on a little rail. Don't think about the closet door sliding back. Don't think about looking up and seeing the effigy standing there with a hackstand knocking. Don't think it, don't think it, don't. I leaned down and gripped Bongo's collar and buried my face in his ruff. Well, leave, I whispered. Tomorrow morning. Well, get out of this horrible place and I'll call Dad and he can burn this awful house down and well, go home and never come back again. He licked my face. I took this as approval. I don't know how I slept. It seems insane that I could sleep, but terror is exhausting, so somehow I did. I don't remember dreaming, or if I was dreaming, it was about sitting in a closet, so there was no real difference. When I woke, it was morning and the thing was gone. The door was still locked. The window was unbroken. I looked out the window with my heart in my throat, and I saw the porch and sunlight and nothing more. Bongo pawed at my leg, making his want-to-go-at noises. Yes, I said. Well, go. Well, go for good. I could not spend another night here, of course. You didn't spend the night in a place with monstrous deer creatures staring in the windows. I didn't care about the manuscript or the book or the potential money from selling the house. I wanted out. I picked up my purse and my laptop bag. I snapped Bongo's leash onto his collar. I did this all as if it were normal, as if I were packing to go to the coffee shop. I would leave my suitcase behind. The suitcase didn't matter. Clothes could be replaced. All I needed was my wallet and my phone and my computer and my dog. Opening the front door took more courage than I have ever needed in my life. I looked through the screen and waited for the thing to get me. Nothing happened. The sun was shining. I heard birds singing. I wanted to scream at them, because how dare there be birds singing when the woods were full of monsters? Bongo shoved his nose against the screen and whined. 20 steps to the truck. 20 steps put Bongo in, and then another half dozen around the front to the driver's side. 26 steps. I could do this. I opened the door and flung myself outside. 1 step, 2 steps, 3, 4 shit. On the 4th step, halfway down the porch stairs, my foot came down on something that rolled. I tried to catch myself, missed a step, and landed on my knees in the grass. The shock of the fall slammed up my wrists and into my spine. Do you remember when you were a kid and you fell down constantly and it was just no big deal? Somewhere along the way that changes and you start to realize how old folks fall down and die as a result. I knelt in the grass, not thinking, for several seconds. Adrenaline had whited out my mind completely. You're fine, I said aloud to myself in the same voice I use when Bongo gets the leash wrapped around himself. Nothing's broken. I had no damn idea if anything was broken or not. I was just saying it in hopes that it would be true. The panic faded. I sat up and flexed my wrists and my ankles, and nothing did seem to be broken. Okay. A deer monster hadn't eaten me yet. I just had to get up. My first reflexive thought was for my computer. I'm not proud that was the first thing I thought of, but there we are. Had I cracked the screen, would it work? It was still on my back. Okay. My second thought, belatedly, was Bongo. Had the sudden fall hurt him? Was he okay? I hadn't heard a yelp. I lifted my hand and stared at it. It was empty. I had dropped the leash when I tried to catch myself. Bongo was nowhere to be seen. I looked down at his tracks in the mud, deep and clear, with the nails sharply defined. They ran around behind the house. I was on my feet before I realized it and running, discovering that I'd skinned my knees in the fall, not caring. He wasn't behind the house. The tracks got into the grass and then into the leaves. Head smelled something, and while I'd been on my knees mumbling to myself like an idiot, had gone after it with all the single-minded intensity of a coonhound on the scent. Hounds are almost all dumb as posts, but if their nose turns on, suddenly they are professionals on a mission. This is why you never, ever let them off the leash. Bongo, I called. Buddy Bongo, where are you? 5 minutes ago, I had been terrified to make a sound because I thought the deer monster would get me. Now I was screaming for all the good it did me. I circled the house once, twice, not knowing what direction to go. What if it was the wrong way and I got too far away to find him? I was paralyzed with indecision. Bongo, come back. I looked at the tracks again and thought I've really got to trim his nails, and then I burst into tears because I was already stretched past what humans should have to deal with, and now my dog was gone. I collapsed on the porch stairs and put my face in my hands. I couldn't leave now. I couldn't leave him. He was wandering somewhere around these awful woods, probably chasing rabbits or deer or something, but what if the things got him? What if he was scared, wherever he was? What if he wandered onto a road? He wasn't that smart. He didn't really understand roads. He'd try to make friends with a car. I cried until it became obvious that Bongo wasn't going to show up and lick my face. Eventually I stopped because I was on the porch, and the porch wasn't safe. Were the things still there? Had Bongo run out and chased them off? Had he saved me? And I twisted myself around like the twisted ones. I couldn't deal with that, so I decided not to think about it anymore. Okay, I said. My voice was shaky, but I couldn't dissolve into a useless pile of snot. Bongo needed me. I had to do the right things. I will get up. I will make coffee. I will find a phone book in this wreck, and I'll call every pound in the county and make sure they know he's missing. I stood up. I felt lightheaded. Maybe you think I was stupid. Maybe you're right. Never go back for the cat, right? That's how you get eaten by aliens. But I knew perfectly well that I couldn't leave. My dog was out there somewhere. Until I had him back, or had proof he wasn't coming back, I was going to stay. 10. I drank coffee and then I called 3 different pounds on the landline. Yes, he was chipped. Yes, he'd had all his shots. Yes, he still had the collar with the rabies tag on it. No, this number didn't have voicemail. No, my cell phone wasn't working reliably, but they could leave a message. Or send an email. Or they could call the coffee shop in town. I prayed Enid wouldn't mind. I didn't think she would. It was all so normal and efficient. There was a system. I put on my pleasant doing business with people voice and I answered questions, and all the time I wanted to scream, do you know there are monsters in the woods? And if there are monsters in the woods, then the whole world is not what we pretend it is. Do you understand? I did not say this because that would have made me sound crazy, and it wouldn't have helped get Bongo back. But every time I got off the phone, I had to pace back and forth for a minute, drinking lukewarm coffee while my teeth chattered on the edge of the mug. I wasn't cold. I was jittery with knowledge and horror. When I had called the last pound, I stared into the empty coffee pot. Apparently I'd drunk all of it. I went to the front porch and looked down the steps. The round thing that had turned under my feet was a bone. I know that sounds sinister, but when you have dogs you get used to some things. I don't know what kind of bone it was, just a normal bone with a knob on one end and a Nordorf spike on the other. It was stained deep oranged. You didn't need to be a geologist to know it was the color of the red clay that lay under the soil here, exposed every time someone dug a hole. Had the effigy left it, dropped it on the steps as it left the house, like it was shedding. No. Get a hold of yourself. It's just a bone. For all I knew, Bongo had dug it up sometime when I wasn't looking and it had gotten kicked onto the stairs. Should I call the police and tell them what exactly? I saw a monster and then there was a bone on the stairs and my dog ran away after something. I thought of Officer Bob. I thought of walking through the trees, looking for the effigy, and then I thought, oh sweet fuck, what if it was alive when I saw it? What if it was hanging in a tree watching me? What if it was just playing possum and laughing to itself? What if it was chasing us when we ran? No. No. It had been daylight. Surely things like that weren't allowed to come around in daylight, were they? Allowed by whom? This train of thought would end with me crouched in the bathroom with a shotgun aimed at the door. This would not help Bongo, and also I didn't know how to use a shotgun. If I were a good owner, I would go out into the woods and call for him and bring treats. I inhaled sharply at the thought. I couldn't do it. I knew I should, I really did, but I couldn't go back out just yet. Not alone. Not even for him. What if I go looking and I find another effigy and it's Bongo? What if they make another one out of him and he comes to the window with his skull flipped over and his paws on the windowsill and I twisted myself around like the twisted ones? I screamed. I actually screamed and swept everything off the counter. It was only the ramen and the oatmeal boxes and a plastic cup of water. The cup bounced. I never do things like that. I don't throw things. I don't scream. I never understood people who lob toasters at their boyfriends. Why would you waste a perfectly good toaster? Well, I'm under a lot of stress. Monsters are stressful. And I should probably stop drinking coffee. I paced back and forth. I went to the bathroom. I paced back and forth some more. I should do something. I should move boxes. Why am I moving boxes when there are monsters in the woods? I paced back and forth, clenching and unclenching my fists, and finally I said out loud, because the boxes have to get moved. I went to the doll room. It smelled of my grandmother's malice, which was nothing compared to what had stared in the window last night. I hauled plastic bins out of the hallway filled with dead baby dolls and plastic newborns with their eyes squeezed shut, and I felt only vague, impartial disgust. I wrestled the bins onto the tailgate and into the bed of the truck. Somehow I thought there'd been more doll bins in the truck already. I vaguely remembered taking some out last night, but the bed was nearly empty, so that must have been the last load. Probably all the junk was starting to blur together. Probably I wasn't terribly reliable at the moment. The truck filled with dolls. I slammed another plastic crate down on the tailgate, hard enough to make the truck bounce. The lid popped off and dolls flew. Shit. Holy Jesus, said Foxy, coming up the drive. Was your grandma in a cult or something? I let out a thin laugh, choked on it, and put my face in my hands. Oh, honey, what's wrong? Before I quite knew what was happening, I was sobbing on Fox's non-existent bosom. She was all collarbones and necklaces. Bongo's gone, I choked out. He ran off. I hope he ran off. There's things in the woods, Foxy. I saw one. I think him going crazy. Oh God, what if they got him? Easy now, said Foxy, patting my back. Easy, hon. Well, get it sorted. She patted me for a few minutes, just long enough for me to start feeling horrified and embarrassed instead of horrified and overwhelmed, and then produced a handkerchief from somewhere in her pockets. I wiped my eyes. I'm sorry, I said. Don't be. You ain't the first to cry on me. Or the 10th. Now, let's go to my place and have some lemonade, and we can sit on the porch and you can tell me all what happened. Y'all think I'm crazy, I whispered. My throat was raw. Sure, but I won't hold that against you. Foxy led me across the road as I leaned on her arm. I felt like I was limping with both feet. As soon as I was sitting on her porch, I felt better. Foxy had wind chimes hanging all over the porch, and some of them were stones with holes in them. But they went click-jangle in a cheerful manner, like Fox's bangles rattling together, not like a monster with stones in its ribs. There were other people around. I had an idea somehow that the thing wouldn't show up in front of other people. Maybe that was a horror movie idea, that monsters only show up when you're alone, but I felt safe. Foxy went inside and came out a moment later with a pitcher of lemonade and 2 glasses. I took one and drank it while the condensation ran down over my fingers. "All right," she said. She sat down beside me on the steps and we looked out over the winding driveway in the grass. I couldn't see my grandmother's house from here. From the very slight elevation, I could see a little way over the woods behind the house. There was no hill and no ring of hills, and somehow that didn't surprise me. I told her everything. I started crying again when I had to explain that Bongo was missing, and then I said out loud the thing I hadn't wanted to think, which was that the thing would get him and I should have protected him, and ID failed and had trusted me because I was his human, and then I burst into tears again. "Now stop that," said Foxy sharply. "You don't know that at all. He might come on back tonight, full of deer ticks and smelling like skunk." I scrubbed at my face. "Do you think so? Wouldn't surprise me. Dogs are smart enough to be afraid. If he ran off, I can promise it wasn't after one of them." I took another gulp of lemonade. "You believe me about the thing?" "Believe you shit." The lines of her face deepened, and for a minute she looked a lot older than 60. "Of course. Didn't realize until just now that you don't know." "Know what?" I said blankly. "About them. The people in the hollers. Whatever you want to call them." "I don't know anything." I spread my hands. "What am I supposed to know?" Foxy shook her head. "I messed up," she said. "I thought you had to know about them, at least a bit. Figured your granny would have told you." "Ha," I said, and took a slug of lemonade. "Yeah, not the brightest thing I've ever thought. But when you said you saw the hill, I figured you had to know something, 'cause you got up there in the first place and then got out again." She glared into her lemonade. "I don't know anything," I repeated. "What am I supposed to know about who's in the hollers? There aren't even any hollers around here, are there?" Sometimes there are, sometimes there ain't. It comes and goes. Most times there's no problems, you understand. Sometimes things get turned around and you end up in country that ain't supposed to be there. Like hills that don't exist. Yeah, like that. But how is that possible? I flapped my hands. Hasn't somebody made a topographic map or taken photos or something and noticed that there was a hill that wasn't supposed to be there? Foxy shook her head. "Don't think it's that easy to get there. I only done it once myself. And you show up spouting foolishness about hills being where everybody knows there's no hills. Who's gonna believe you? They can look over and see there's no hill there." "But what, how?" Foxy sighed. "I dunno. I mean, people say they know things and try to look smart, but I don't think anybody knows anything for sure. The hills are just where the holler people live. Old-timers talk about seeing 'em now and again. Tall and skinny and white like nobody you ever saw." "I didn't see anybody like that," I said. I thought of the hiker I'd seen, the one dressed like a hippie, but she hadn't been particularly tall and pale, had she not? A naturally so, anyway. Yeah. Never seen one either. But the deer thing's one of theirs. They leave stuff around sometimes. Mostly it's piled up stones and marks on trees. Talking to each other, like. But sometimes they make something that walks around." I clutched my lemonade. The porch didn't seem quite so safe anymore. "But why?" Foxy shrugged. "Dunno. I only seen it twice. One was a hog, but they'd stuck a wasp's nest where its head ought to be. It was out digging up fields and a friend of my daddy's shot it. Couldn't get too close to it 'cause of the wasps, so they threw hay over it and burned it. They're uncanny, but they ain't fireproof." "That's a relief," I said faintly. "What about the other time?" "Raccoon. Thought it had rabies or something. It was sort of shuffling around, but you got close enough. You could see it was all held together with cords and junk." "What did you do?" "Ran it over with the tractor a couple of times. Had to stop using that chunk of field, of course. Daddy said the ground would be bad under it." This was over in Bynum. When we sold the place, we told 'em that bit was bad, but I doubt they listened. Still, I figure if you're growing all those weirdest glowing thick soybeans, a little bad magic ain't gonna make things much worse. So it's magic, then? Foxy rolled her eyes. It's making dead animals walk around and hills vanish. What the hell else would it be? Aliens? But magic, I flailed. Magic in my head was a mix of stage magicians in white gloves and really well-meaning people who did yoga and believed in the healing power of crystals. I attempted to express this to Foxy, who looked at me like I was a baby bird that had fallen out of the nest and hit its head. I don't think the whole people are doing yoga, she said. But where are they? I dunno. Little to one side of here, I think. Somewhere like this but with hills and hollers. They come through sometimes and we go through sometimes, and sometimes the way's open and sometimes it ain't. You must gone through when it was open. Dumb luck or something. It was bongo, I said. He found the way through. Yeah. A lot of dogs would thought twice, but hounds get a smell and their brain turns off. Well, you know. But even he was smart enough to be scared of one of their walking things. And nobody reports this, nobody says, hey, there's a bunch of scary people around here making dead animals walk around. She snorted. Yeah, that'd be good for a story. Hillbillies claim the woods are haunted, blame little people. Or if they did find one of the walking things, it'd be redneck satanic horror. We'd have reporters in the shitter and nobody'd find anything. Assuming anybody even listened in the first place. So nobody knows, then. Most old-timers around here get a notion. But you talk about it and you sound crazy, so nobody talks about it much. And the cops just shrug. That sheriff fellow who was out here earlier, he knows the stories, I'll bet you, but what cop is gonna admit they believe in that kind of thing? They'd get laughed out of the station. And if you get any of them ghost hunter people, they head over to Chatham and the Devil's Tramping Ground. Though I'll tell you, I've been there. And the devil needs to throw out them old refrigerators if he wants to do any serious tramping. Place is a dump. But, she looked at me over the rim of her jar. Think about it, Hon. You tell somebody, how you gonna start? I took a deep shuddering breath and drank more lemonade, trying to think of an answer. Sure, Enid and Officer Bob had believed me about the effigy hanging from a tree, but if I tried to tell them it had been in the window, that it had been alive, Officer Bob probably already half believed that I was making things up. Enid seemed like she might be more sympathetic, but what was she going to do about it? Come fight the effigy off with a thermos of decaf. I imagined calling my father and saying, Dad, there's monsters in the woods. Dad, I saw something horrible, and the weird woman across the road says it's the holler people, and I climbed a hill that wasn't there and there was a deer effigy hanging in the trees, but when I tried to call the cops, it was gone, and then it came back at night in my window. No, I didn't dream it. Even in my head it sounded stupid. The wind chimes blew back and forth in a wind that smelled like turned earth and spring, not like raccoons held together with cords and hogs with wasp nests where their heads would be. Like I said, I figured your granny'd have told you something, said Foxy after a while. Didn't think about what a nasty piece of work she was. I don't think she knew, I said. Cotgrave, her husband, he knew something. He had a journal and said he saw them in Wales. Foxy nodded. Figure you get any set of old hills, he'll have something in it. Probably holler people all over the world, if you know where to look. I shuddered. This was not a comforting thought. He also said he thought that things didn't come around her. That she smelled bad to them or something. Hut, said Foxy. She thought about that. Suppose that makes sense. Some smells you just don't want to be around. Skip can't stand liver, won't even come in the house if I'm cooking it. Doesn't mean he's scared of liver. Don't think the holler people are scared of much, but I can see 'em giving that house a wide berth unless they had to go there. I think it's why he married her, I said. He had some kind of experience with them in Wales, and then he thought she was safe because they just didn't want to be around her. Foxy snorted. Lord. Talk about being caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. Yeah. His journal's rambling, but by the end he's saying he'd rather deal with them. Cotgrave's white people must be the same as Fox's hollow people. If I could find his typed manuscript, surely it'd have something more, wouldn't it? Assuming it existed. Assuming he knew anything for certain. Assuming his medication hadn't been playing tricks on him and it wasn't a letter to Ambrose. Ambrose, I don't know who you were, but I wish I could talk to you or smack you or something. So what are you going to do? Asked Foxy. I have to stay, I said. It was easier to say out loud than I expected. Until Bongo comes back. Foxy nodded. You can come stay here, she said. I ain't saying they won't come here, but company's better than none. I took a deep breath. I want to, I said. But if he comes back, he'll come to the house. He got out once back in Pittsburgh and he came back after 3 days of rabbit chasing. I tried not to think about what would happen if Bongo decided to go home to Pittsburgh. The noses on hounds are good enough that I once swear he couldn't smell his way back there while I sat in a house surrounded by deer monsters. There comes a point where terrible things are funny. It's the point where the furnace is broken and the hot water heater is leaking and your dog comes in smelling of skunk and the check engine light has come on when you go to get tomato juice. You stop crying and you stop being frustrated because none of that will help. All you can do is start laughing hysterically because that's the only thing that's left. Foxy let me laugh until it started to get weird, and then she slapped me on the back repeatedly, as if I were having a coughing fit. Settle down there, Hon. Get it all out. I got some stuff that might help you or might not, but it never hurts to try. Fox's stuff was a little velvet bag of herbs and a rosary with round wooden beads. Got it at the state fair for $3, she said cheerfully. The roots, though, that's from a guy down south who said he studied under Doc Buzzard. Doc Buzzard, I asked. A hoodoo man. He was probably lying, but you never know. Anyway, it ain't gonna hurt. You know how to pray the rosary? No. She looked faintly disappointed, but rallied anyway. It don't matter. The Holler people ain't religious. But the beads are hickory and hickory's special. In all of Aunt Kate's botanical musings, she had never covered the specialness of hickory. I knew oak and ash and rowan from reading fantasy novels, but not hickory. I said as much to Foxy. No, she said. It ain't